Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wassalatu wassalamu ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa ashabihi at-tayyibin at-tahirin. I bear witness that no one deserves to be worshipped except Allah Ta'ala, the one who has no partner and no similar, the one who has no length and no width and no depth and no perimeter, the one who's not a volume and is not in a place. And how could he be in a place when he existed before time and space? He created everything except himself, including you and your actions. Nothing occurs except by God's will, both good and bad, he destined to happen. He speaks without sound, letter, or language, not Arabic, Hebrew, nor Korean. He's not light, he's not a spirit. He has nothing in common with human beings. He's not in the direction of up, down, right, left, front, nor back. And whatever you imagine in your mind, Allah is different than that. And I bear witness that our noble, unrivaled master, Muhammad, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, is the slave of Allah, his final messenger, and the best of all of God's creations. May Allah unite us with him in paradise and grant us a drink from his basin. And may Allah increase us in patience, humility, knowledge, and comprehension, and help us to put our knowledge into practice and grant us all sincere intentions. Ameen. Ameen. We're continuing in the book, the Hadrami introduction, Al-Muqaddimah Al-Hadramiyya, which is a beginner's introductory text in the fiqh of Imam al-Shafi'i, rahimahullah. In the text, we've made it to page number 9, where we're going to touch on a subject that, for some reason, has become like controversial or something. I don't know why. It's a simple topic. It's not hard to understand. But man, do people want to argue about it and ask about it? We're going to talk about it. We're on page 9. The chapter that says wiping over leather footgear. So in this chapter, we're going to talk about what are the rules for wiping over some type of garment that one wears on the feet. In certain cases, if a person makes wudu, if the conditions are met, then when they reach the part of the wudu when you would ordinarily wash your feet up to and including the ankles, if the conditions are met, then you can leave on the footgear that you're wearing and wipe on top of the footgear. And this will enable you to make the salat. Okay, this will put you in a situation where you can perform a valid salat without washing your feet. This is called wiping on footgear. It's a special dispensation, rukhsa, which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in his mercy gave to us. It is not the standard rule. The standard rule is that when you make wudu, you wash your feet up to and including the ankle. But this special dispensation was given to us to make our lives easier. So if you want to use this dispensation, make sure you're using it according to its rules. Don't get, this might sound a little harsh, but don't get lazy to the point where you start making excuses just to wipe on whatever you got on your feet. Okay, don't be like that. If you're going to wipe on your footgear, make sure the conditions are met. Make sure you're doing it properly so that your salat will be valid. Because if your laziness overpowers you and you decide to just wipe on something that's not valid, well, then what that means is that your salat won't be valid. And what that means then is that you'll be acquiring enormous sins and you're putting yourself in a very risky and dangerous situation on the day of judgment. You don't want that, and I don't want that for you. So let's learn these rules, inshallah, so that we can wipe on our footgear properly. And when in doubt, don't wipe. When in doubt, remove your footgear and wash your feet, because that's the standard rule, which is what we should have in mind every time we make wudu anyway. Okay, when we make wudu, we should expect to follow the standard rule. And, if the conditions are met where you can wipe over your footgear, well then take that as like a blessing. Don't try to make it so that you're wiping all the time. Let's read page 9. It says wiping over leather footgear. So that title there is not part of the actual book. The translator added these titles that are there in blue. The reason why I'm mentioning that is because there's nothing in our madhab that says the footgear have to be leather. Okay, so the author did not specify the word leather. This is something that the translator put there. He says, may Allah have mercy upon the author, it is permissible. I'm going to pause right here at this word permissible. The author, may Allah have mercy on him, he comes right out from the jump to tell you how you should think about this issue. He said, it is permissible to wipe over your footgear. Permissible. Permissible means that it's allowed for you to do it. He did not say it's recommended for you to do this. He did not say it's better for you to do this. He did not say it's obligatory for you to do this. He said it's permissible, which means when the conditions are met, you're allowed to do it. But he did not say recommended or anything like that, because in truth, it is better for you to take the footgear off and wash your feet. That's what's better for you. Not simply because it's more cautious and less risky, but because the actual ibadah is better when you wash your feet. Okay, your wudu is more perfect when you wash your feet than it is when you wipe on the footgear. So we shouldn't be thinking of wiping on footgear as if that's the desirable way to make your wudu. Rather, that's the, wiping on your footgear is like the fallback method of making wudu. You fall back to that when you have a need to fall back to it, but that shouldn't be like your habit. Your habit should be to do things in the best way, and the best way to make wudu is to wash your feet. He says, may Allah have mercy on him, it is permissible to wipe over and again, he puts the word leather in parentheses. The actual author of the Arabic text did not specify leather, and there's no need for him to specify leather here either. It is permissible to wipe over the footgear instead of washing the feet when performing wudu. So what he means here when he says instead of washing the feet, what he means is that wiping over the footgear is a substitute for washing the feet. Okay? It's not a substitute for the whole wudu. All right, if you have on footgear, it doesn't mean that when you want to make wudu, you just wipe on the footgear and that's it. No, the rest of the wudu is normal. You still need to have the intention. You still need to wash your entire face with flowing water. You still need to wash both your hands from the fingertips up to and including the elbows with flowing water. You still have to wipe some part of your head. But when you get to the part where you wash your feet, at that part, there's an alternative. Instead of washing your feet up to and including the ankles, you have the option of leaving your footgear on and wiping on the footgear. That's what's meant when it says instead of washing on the feet. This is a substitute for that one part of the wudu. It says instead of washing the feet when performing wudu. Why does it say when performing wudu? This is an indication here that wiping on the footgear is only an option in wudu. Okay, there's no such thing as making a ghusl, but leaving your footgear on and wiping on the footgear in your ghusl. There's no such thing as wiping on footgear as part of a tayammum. Okay, you wipe on the footgear in wudu. That's the only place where this dispensation exists. Inshallah, that is clear. Then he says the conditions of wiping are. So what he's going to mention now are the 5 conditions that must be met in order for it to be permissible for you to wipe on your footgear. If any one of these 5 conditions have not been satisfied, then wiping on the footgear will not put you in a state where you can perform a valid salat. Is that clear? I'm going to say it again. If any one of these 5 conditions have not been satisfied, then wiping on your khuf will not put you in a state of purity. And therefore, the salat that you pray will not be valid. We're going to go through these rules, these conditions, one at a time, insha'Allah ta'ala. Number 1, it says to wear the footgear after complete purification. So the first condition about wiping on footgear is you can only wipe on the footgear if you did not put them on until you were already in a state of purity. So let me say that again. If you are in a state of purity already, if you're in a situation where you can make salat right now, if you're in that situation, and while in that situation you put the footgear on, well, then in that case, you've met the first condition. What's the first condition? That you did not put the footgear on until after you were already in a state of complete purification. Complete purification meaning you could make salat right at that moment if you wanted to. While you were in that state, you put on the footgear. So what that means is, if a person wakes up in the morning and they go and make wudu for Fajr, they make a normal wudu, washing their feet and everything, okay? And after they finished their wudu, they put on some footgear, then this would meet the first condition. But don't get slick about it. Don't get slick about it. Some people might think that if they make a regular old wudu, washing their face and hands and head, and then when it comes time to washing the feet, some people might think that if they wash their right foot up to and including the ankle, and now it's been washed, now they put on footgear on the right foot, and then they go and they wash the left foot up to and including the ankle, and then they put footgear on the left foot. Some people might make the mistake of thinking that satisfies the first condition, but it does not satisfy the first condition. Why doesn't it satisfy the first condition? Wasn't the right foot washed before you put on the footgear? It was. Wasn't the left foot washed before you put on the footgear? It was. So how come it doesn't meet the condition? Because when you put the footgear on your right foot, you didn't have wudu yet. You hadn't yet washed your left foot. You were not, when you put the right foot on, when you put the right footgear on, you were not in a state where you could have made salat at that moment because your wudu wasn't complete. Your left foot hadn't been washed yet. You understand? Condition number 1 means you had to be in a state where you could make salat that moment. And while in that state, you put on the footgear. So the person who washed his right foot and then put the footgear on the right foot, then washed the left foot and put the footgear on the left foot, that person put the right footgear on early. He put the right footgear on too soon. And so if he stayed like that, he would not be able to wipe on his footgear. Okay, he would not be able to wipe on his footgear in that case. If you fall into that situation, the easy solution would be to just take off the right footgear and then put it back on again. Now when you put the right footgear on, it will meet the first condition because at that point, you've already washed the left foot as well. So now you're in a state of full purification. So condition number 1, to wear the footgear after complete purification. And just for clarity's sake, you'll sometimes see this in translations where they use the word wear. to wear something. But usually, not always, but usually when these translators translate lebisa as wear, what they really mean is put on. So you might want to make a little note here that when it says to wear the footgear after purification, what it really means is to put on the footgear after complete purification. So you don't put it on until then. Number 2. Condition number 2. It says that the footgear is pure. Okay. So the second condition pertains to the material that your footgear is made out of. It may not be made out of a substance that is najis, filthy in and of itself. For example, if you had leather that was made from pig skin, that leather would be najis. So if you're wearing footgear made of pig skin, you cannot wipe on it. Just like you can't make salat in it. Or if you're wearing footgear made of dog skin, you cannot wipe on it, nor can you wear it in the salat. Or if you're wearing footgear made out of skin from roadkill, you know, you found a dead animal in the woods or something, you decided to make some shoes out of it. Well, if that skin was not tanned, then that skin is najis. If it's been tanned, then it's not najis anymore, so you can wear it. But if it's an untanned hide from a dead animal, or if it's a hide from a pig or a dog or something like that, then that means this footgear is najis, filthy, and you cannot wipe on it in your as part of your wudu. This also means that if your footgear is contaminated with najis, it won't satisfy condition number 2 either. So let's say you had some footgear on that was made out of cow leather and it was completely pure. It was not najis. It was something that ordinarily would be valid for you to wipe on. But on this particular day, you know, you stepped in some poop, or I don't know, a bird poop landed on your footgear, or some, you know, drunken dude walking by spilled beer and it got on your footgear. Okay, if your footgear is itself najis, filthy, you can't wipe on it. But also, if your footgear has been contaminated by najis filth, then that contamination must be removed. You have to wash away the contamination before it would meet condition number 2. So in order to wipe on your footgear, it has to be pure, meaning it's not najis, filthy in and of itself, and it's not contaminated by najis filth either. Okay. The translator again put a note down here saying that it needs to be made from pure leather, and that is not the case. Okay. In the Shafi'i school, footgear can be made from anything as long as it's not pure. I mean, as long as it is pure. And, you know, all 5 conditions have to be met. But let's just say, for the sake of argument, that someone was wearing wooden shoes. Y'all know there's a country in Europe, the Netherlands, that was famous in the past for people there wear wooden shoes, or they used to. If you had wooden shoes that met all these criteria, then you'd be able to wipe on them. There's no rule that says they have to be leather. Okay, or if you wore, shoes made out of glass, like if the other conditions are met, then you can wipe on them. There's no rule in the Shafi'i school that says the footgear have to be leather. Rather, the rule is you have to meet these 5 conditions. That's the rule. Condition number 3. That the footgear is strong enough to make it possible to continue walking on it for the traveler when needed. What does that mean? It means that the footgear that you are wearing you must be able to wear it for the needs of a traveler for the duration of time that you're permitted to wear this footgear. You have to be able to wear it for all of those needs without damaging the footgear, and also without you being unable to take it. So there are several ways in which condition number 3 might fail to be satisfied. So let's talk about some of them. One of them is strength. One of them is strength. Okay? So let's just talk for a little bit about what we mean. I'm going to go into a little bit more detail here to make sure it's understood. And I'm going to have to get a little bit ahead of myself because he doesn't talk about the time dimensions, the time frames until after the 5-point list. But I'm going to talk about it a little bit now. If a person is a traveler and the conditions are met, then he would be able to wipe on his footgear for 72 hours. If the person is not a traveler with the conditions met, meaning he's either like not a traveler at all, or he is a traveler, but he doesn't have all the conditions to be able to wipe for 72 hours, in that case, this person would be able to wipe just 24 hours. So some people are allowed to wipe for a 24-hour period. Other people are allowed to wipe for a 72-hour period. In either case, you need to ask yourself, what would a traveler need to do for that period of time? So if a traveler were traveling for 24 hours, what would a traveler need to do? And you need to think back to like the past, the way people traveled hundreds of years ago. Okay, a person traveling 100 years or 300 years ago, 400 years ago, they probably would have been traveling with animals. He might be riding on one camel and might have another camel next to him carrying his stuff. And what would happen is they would travel for however many hours, then they would take a rest. Like they would get down from the animal, they'd find a spot in the shade, they'd unpack the things they need to make a tent in order to make a camp. They might make a fire, they might lay down a mat to sleep on or lay down on, they might try to gather some water to water their animals, they might try to gather some food or gather some kindling to make the fire. They might need to set some things up, might need to tie down some things, but they would have to do quite a bit of walking around for these kind of chores. And then at the end of their break, they would then have to strike the camp. So they'd have to pack all that stuff back up and load it back where it was, and then get back up on the animal and start traveling again. And in a 24-hour period, they might actually stop like that, say 3 times in the course of the day. Okay, in the course of a 24-hour period, they might stop and need to pitch camp and strike camp 3 times. So the question is, whatever this footgear is that he's wearing, would he be able to wear it for all of that? Let's say, for the sake of argument, that a practiced traveler would be able to pitch camp in 20 or 30 minutes and would be able to strike camp in 15 or 20 minutes. That means every time he pitched camp, he would need a solid, 45 minutes to potentially as much as an hour each time he pitched camp. That's counting the pitching and the striking of the camp. But he would pitch camp 3 times a day. So it means he would need to be able to walk around in this footgear for, say, 2.5 hours. Not 2.5 hours in a row, but 2.5 hours, like 45 minutes here, 45 minutes there, 1 hour there. He would need to be able to wear his footgear for all of those chores. So what that means is the footgear has to be the right size. Because if his foot gear is too small, it would hurt his feet to walk for 2.5 hours, and he wouldn't be able to take it. So it would not be valid for him to wipe on it. If they're so small, he couldn't wear it for that amount of time. Similarly, if his foot gear is the wrong size because it's too big, it might hurt his feet to walk in it for 2.5 hours. Again, not 2.5 hours in a row, but 45 minutes here, 1 hour there, 45 minutes there. He may not be able to walk in it for 45 straight minutes because they're too big. If that's the case, it does not meet condition number 3. It's also possible that the size is completely fine, but it's not flexible enough. So for example, if he was wearing those wooden shoes or shoes made of glass, the size might be okay, but he might find that because the shoe can't bend with the bending of his foot, that he can't bear walking on it for 45 minutes. Or it could be that he doesn't have any of those problems. The size is great. The flexibility is great. It's extremely comfortable. But the thing that the foot gear is made out of is such a weak material that if he walked in it for 45 minutes here, 1 hour there, 45 minutes here, if he walked on it out on the natural ground where there's rocks and sticks and things like that, if he walked on it for that long, he would destroy the foot gear. He'd put holes in it, for example, by walking around in it that much. In that case, it means his foot gear doesn't meet condition number 3. It's not strong enough that he could walk around in it for 45 minutes here, 1 hour there, 45 minutes here in a 24-hour period. It's not strong enough to hold up to that amount of walking. If that's the case, it does not meet condition number 3. So if you understand what I just said about condition number 3, you will see why socks, whether they're the thin dress socks, whether they're thin like a woman's stockings, whether they're thick like gym socks, whether they're very thick like the socks people wear in the winter to keep their feet extra warm, none of those socks are strong enough to stand up to 2.5 hours of walking out in nature, walking on a surface that's full of rocks and sticks. Okay? Those socks that I just described, you would put a hole in them if you were to do that. According to the Shafi'i madhab, there's no way you can wipe on socks. Unless, of course, you found some socks that were strong enough to stand up to all of that. Nowadays, there are people they're like companies that make socks for different purposes. It's conceivable that there might be out there in the world socks strong enough to stand up to that. It's conceivable that they might exist. I personally don't know of any socks that can stand up to that much wear and tear. And everything I just said pertain to the person who's only given a 24-hour period upon which to wipe his foot gear. That person would need to be able to wear this foot gear for 2.5 hours, split up as 45 minutes here, 1 hour there, 45 minutes there, for example. Okay? But now imagine that someone's a traveler. Imagine that someone is someone that's entitled to wipe on his foot gear for a 72-hour period. Well, then it means that the foot gear has to be strong enough that it could stand up to 3 days of doing that. So that would mean not 2.5 hours, but 7.5 hours of walking in it. Meaning 45 minutes here, 1 hour there, 45 minutes here on the first day, 45 minutes here, 1 hour there, 45 minutes here on the second day, 45 minutes here, 1 hour there, 45 minutes here on the third day. It would need to stand up to all of that. It would need to be strong enough to handle all of that, and flexible enough and right-sized enough that the person could handle wearing it for all of that. If all of those conditions are met, well, then we say condition number 3 is satisfied. Okay, so according to the Shafi'i school, socks do not meet the conditions, and you cannot wipe on the socks. Please understand, this book is a Shafi'i book, and what we're teaching here are the Shafi'i rules. Okay? What I'm telling you here is that wiping on socks is not valid according to the Shafi'i madhab. Okay, I'm not speaking right now about other madhabs. No, as usual, other madhabs might say things that are slightly different. But in the Shafi'i school, socks are not an option, or at least not the normal socks that most people wear. Condition number 4. It must be covering the area of washing, although not from above. I'm not sure why he put necessarily there. He didn't say necessarily in the Arabic text. What condition number 4 means is that whatever this footgear is that you're wearing, in order for it to be valid for you to wipe on, this footgear must cover the entire area that you're required to wash in your wudu, which means it must cover your entire foot from the tips of the toes up to and including the ankles. All of that area has to be covered. It says, although not from above. What does that mean? It means that your foot has to be covered from every side, from every direction. All right, so the bottom of your foot is covered by this footgear. The sides of your feet are covered by the footgear, including the back of the foot and the front of the foot is covered by this footgear. The top of your foot is covered by this footgear. Okay, but if there's an opening on the top side of the footgear, an opening for you to put your foot in through that opening, well, if after your foot has been put in and you're wearing it properly, if you can still see through the opening part of your foot down in there, this is excused. Okay, we're saying if part of your foot is visible, if part of your foot is uncovered because of the opening, which points to the direction of above, if that's the only reason why the foot isn't completely covered, well, then that's okay. All right, you're allowed to have an opening on the top side, even if that opening is a wide opening, such that a person might see your foot if they look down into the opening. That's excused. That's not a problem. The issue is if a person's looking from the side of your foot, will they see any of the foot? If a person's looking from below your foot, will they see any of your foot? Or if they're looking from the front or the back or the other side, will they see any of your foot or ankle? As long as it's covered from all of those directions, then it's a valid, it meets condition number 4 in that case. Someone said she's pretty sure these conditions are the same in Maliki fiqh. I'm pretty sure they're not, sister. The strong opinion in the Maliki school is that the footgear must be made out of leather. Okay, so the Shafi'is have more flexibility in terms of what kind of materials it can be made of. The Malikis may have some other opinions on the issue, but the famous opinion in the Maliki school is that the footgear must be leather. In the Shafi'i school, it does not have to be leather. It can be any substance that meets these conditions. The 5th and final condition is that it says the footgear must be impervious to water, although not from the laces and joint. What that means is that the footgear, one of the qualities of this footgear that you're wearing, it needs to be such that if a person took some water, like say a person took their hand, put their hand in a bucket of water, and then sort of held their hand like this, so there's a whole lot of water dripping from the fingertips. If a person went like that on top of the footgear, maybe like a couple tablespoons worth of water landed on the footgear, it must be the case that the water doesn't seep through. If any moisture from that water reaches whatever is below, whatever's on the inside of the footgear, then this means the footgear does not meet condition number 5. Okay, the footgear needs to be, for want of a better word, waterproof. It must be the case that if you drip water on it or pour like a small amount of water on it, it will not seep through. This is another reason why socks would not be valid to wipe on in the Shafi'i school. In addition to the fact that they're not strong enough, socks also are not waterproof normally. Water will seep through them in most cases. Right. But note that it says, although not from the laces and joint. So what that means is, say you're wearing a pair of boots. Okay, boots normally will count as valid footgear in the Shafi'i school if you're wearing a pair of boots, because normally boots are made of a pure substance. Normally they're strong enough for you to walk around in for hours without being damaged. Normally they cover the foot as well as the ankle, and normally if you drip water on it, it won't seep through. So that means as long as you waited until you had complete purification before you put the boots on, normally the pair of boots will, in fact, fulfill all 5 of these conditions. So I'm just using boots as an example because a lot of us, when we do wipe on our footgear, it's because we're wearing boots. If you're wearing boots and you decide to test, will the water seep through these boots? The test is, will the water seep through like the, how do I put it? If the only reason the water got through the boot is because it seeped in through the shoelace hole, you know, your boots might have little holes to put the shoelaces through. If the water got inside only because it went through the shoelace hole, or only because it seeped through one of the places where the stitching, you know, where the needle goes in and out, sometimes there's little tiny holes there. Or sometimes there's like a zipper, and because of the zipper, the water can get through the zipper. You know, if that is the only reason why the water seeped through, then in this case, we say it does meet condition 5. We say it still counts as being waterproof, right? Because the water didn't seep through the actual footgear. It seeped through like a couple of holes in the footgear that were necessary. All right, so that's excused. If the water seeped through those places, that's excused. But if something meets all 5 of these conditions, then you would be permitted, again, not recommended to do this, but it would be permissible for you to wipe on your footgear if all 5 of these conditions are met. And for the rest of this lesson, we're just going to assume it's boots, or, you know, perhaps a pair of high top tennis shoes or something like that. But, you know, something that covers the foot as well as the ankle. Something like that would normally fit or meet all of these conditions. Before I go on, are there any questions about the 5 conditions of the footgear? If you have questions, don't be shy, all right? Put them in the box. I can always get to them later. But let's read this next paragraph because he's going to give more important information about wiping over footgear. The author, may Allah have mercy on him, says, here we're talking about the duration of time that you can wipe. He says, the resident takes it off after a day and its night. So what that means is if you're not traveling, okay, if you're in the place where you reside, or if you're in a town, okay, and you're not, and you're in a town that you intend on staying in, say for 4 days, that means you're a resident of the town if you're going to stay there for 4 days. Right. If you are a resident of whatever place you're in right now, then the maximum amount of time that you can wear your footgear is 24 hours. Okay, that's what's meant when they say a day and a night. They mean a 24-hour period. Okay, we don't mean corresponding to like sunrise and sunset. We mean 24 hours. So if your period started at, say, 2 p.m., then it will be completed at 2 p.m. the next day. 24-hour period. It says, and the traveler who travels a journey of shortening after 3 days and its nights. So if you are a traveler, meaning you have the judgment, like the ruling of the Sharia is that you're a traveler, and not just any traveler, but a traveler who is entitled to shorten his salat. You know, in certain cases, the traveler can pray his 4 rak'ah salats as only 2 rak'ahs, but there are conditions that need to be met. We'll talk about those conditions in another chapter. But just know that if the conditions are met such that you would be permitted to shorten a 4 rak'ah salat, well, then that means you would be entitled also to wipe for a period of 72 hours. That would be 3 whole days. Let's make sure that's understood. So if you're a traveler that's able to shorten salats, you have 72 hours. In every other situation, you have 24 hours. But when do you start your clock? When does your 24 hours begin? Does it begin when you first put on your khufs? Is that when your 24 hours begins? Does it begin the first time you made wudu and actually wiped on them? Is that when your 24 hours begins? When do you start your 24-hour clock or your 72-hour clock? He says, the author of the book, may Allah have mercy on him, he says, the beginning of the period is from the minor impurity after wearing them. Aha. So your clock starts the moment you broke your wudu after putting them on. I'm going to say it again. Your clock starts the moment you broke your wudu after putting them on. So let me go through an example to make sure we understand. Get ready to type because I'm going to ask a question and I want people to type in some answers so I can see what y'all think. Imagine somebody, he wakes up in the morning, gets out of bed, he makes wudu, a complete wudu, meaning he washed his feet and his ankles. He prayed Fajr. After he prayed Fajr, he put on his footgear. Okay, and he was still in a state of complete purification when he put on the footgear. So the conditions are met. All right, this question isn't about the conditions. The conditions are all met. When he put on that footgear at 8 a.m. In this example, he put the footgear on what? At 8 a.m. Okay. Then a couple hours later, at 10 a.m., he needed to go to the bathroom. So he goes to the bathroom. He uses the bathroom. Then 2 hours after that, at 12 o'clock, Dhuhr time came in. So he went and he made wudu by washing his face and his hands, and he wiped his head. But when it came time to wash his feet, he decided, since he's wearing the footgear, to just wipe on his footgear. And then he prayed his Dhuhr salat. And he continued for the rest of his day like that. When Asr time came, he wiped on the khufs. When Maghrib came, he wiped on the khufs. Okay, every time he needed to make wudu, he wiped on the footgear instead of washing the feet. Our question, and I hope all of you are ready to write now. The question is, when did his 24-hour clock begin ticking? The options are 8 a.m., which is when he put his footgear on, 10 a.m., which is when he went to the bathroom, or 12 noon, which is when he wiped on his footgear for the first time. Which of these events indicates the start of his 24-hour clock? I'm going to say it again. This person made wudu in the morning, put on his footgear at 8 a.m., then went to the bathroom at 10 a.m., and then at 12 noon, he made a wudu that involved wiping on the footgear. Which of these events indicates the start of his 24-hour period? The question: someone wakes up in the morning after sleeping. He makes a wudu by washing his feet. After that wudu, when he was in a state of complete purification, he put on his footgear at 8 a.m. 2 hours later, at 10 a.m., he goes to the bathroom. 2 hours after that, at 12 noon, he makes wudu by wiping on his footgear. When did his 24-hour clock start? Did it start at 8 a.m. when he put the footgear on? Did it start at 10 a.m. when he went to the bathroom? Or did it start at 12 noon when he first wiped on the footgear? MashaAllah. It's good to have participation. Imam Amin loves asking people to type in the box. I usually don't do that. But the answer to this question is 10 a.m. 10 a.m. is when his clock begins. Let's read in the book to reread the sentence that the author wrote. He says, the beginning of the period is from the minor impurity after wearing them. So the first case of minor impurity, the first time you did something that caused hadath to come onto your body, the first time that you broke wudu after putting the footgear on, that's when your clock starts. So in this example, he put the footgear on at 8 o'clock, but his clock doesn't start simply because he put it on. How come the clock doesn't start at 8 o'clock when he put his footgear on? Because at that point, the footgear aren't doing anything. Okay, remember, he made a full wudu. He washed his feet before he put that footgear on. And the wudu that he made put him in a state of purity. And until he breaks wudu, he's still in that state of purity. So the footgear is no different than any other clothing all the way up until 10 a.m. when he goes to the bathroom. At 10 a.m., when he went to the bathroom, he broke his wudu, which means now the footgear is actually working. The footgear, you can think of it as if the footgear began protecting his feet at that point in time. So after 10 a.m., if he wants to make another wudu, he doesn't have to wash his feet. He can wash his face and his arms and wipe his head. And when it comes time to wash the feet, he just leaves the footgear on and he wipes on the footgear. So the footgear began benefiting him at 10 a.m. Prior to 10 a.m., the footgear weren't doing anything. Because prior to 10 a.m., he could have taken them off and still made a salat. But starting at 10 a.m., now he can't take them off. He needs to leave the footgear on in order to get the benefit. So they started benefiting him at 10 a.m. And it just so happens that 12 noon is the first time he actually decided to take advantage of this benefit. When he made his wudu and wiped on the footgear, he did that at 12 noon. But he could have done that as early as 10 a.m. So 10 a.m. is when the footgear began benefiting him. It just took him 2 hours to use the benefit. Okay, this is important for us to keep in mind. When the clock starts. Second thing you should know, and I'm going to simplify it for you because there's actually a lot of sayings on this, is, how do you know when you broke your wudu? When exactly do you break wudu? If a person had wudu and then they went to the bathroom, and let's say this person was urinating for 60 seconds, did he break his wudu at the first second when the urine first came out? Or did he break his wudu at the 60th second when the urine stopped coming out? When exactly did his wudu break? Because you need to know when to start your 24-hour clock. Do you start the clock when you started peeing, or do you start the clock when you finished peeing? There are different sayings on this. But to make your life easier, I will just tell you that one of the sayings, one of the valid sayings which you can follow, is that any event that breaks wudu, your wudu didn't actually break until the end of the event. Okay? There are different sayings. Some scholars say the beginning, some scholars say the end. The actual strongest opinion is that it depends on which event occurred. But for now, I'm going to give you the easiest one. The easiest one to follow is just to go ahead and assume your wudu broke at the end. Like whatever event caused you to lose your wudu, the end of that event is when the wudu broke. Okay? Now, for something like using the bathroom, it's maybe a small difference because, I mean, a person's probably only going to urinate for a minute or two anyway, so it's not a huge deal. But for something like sleeping, there's a big difference. If a person goes to sleep and sleeps for 8 hours, there's a big difference between if you start your 24-hour clock when you fall asleep versus start your 24-hour clock when you wake up. Okay? There can be a significant difference depending on which saying you take on this issue. And so that's why I'm just going to go ahead and tell you the easiest opinion in the madhab is that it's the end of the event. That's when you break your wudu. All right, let's continue. It says if one wipes, can y'all do me a favor and underline that word wipes? If one wipes over one's footgear when resident, then goes on a journey, or vice versa, the wiping period is that of a resident. What does that mean? It means if you were a resident, meaning you were not traveling, and you actually wiped on your footgear, but then before your 24-hour period had completed, you started traveling. And it was a long travel. It was a travel that would have entitled you to shorten your salats. In this case, how long do you have to wipe on your footgear? You were a resident when you started wiping on them, and residents only get 24 hours. But then you started traveling, and travelers get 72 hours. So which one do you get in this case? The answer is you get 24 hours. You get 24 hours. And it said, or vice versa. So let's say you were a traveler when you started using your footgear, when you started wiping on them. And then you reached your destination and you became a resident because you reached your destination. Do you get to finish out your 72 hours now that you stopped being a traveler? No, you don't. All right. If you wiped while you were traveling and then you became a resident, your period of time is now 24 hours, which means it might have ended. It might have ended. Okay. The only person who gets 72 hours to wipe is the person who started wiping while he was traveling and remained a traveler for the whole 72 hours. That's the only person who gets 72 hours to wipe. And I hope you all underline the word wiping, because this issue of which period applies to you, 24-hour period or 72-hour period, this issue depends on when you wipe, does not depend on when you broke wudu. So I want to make sure you keep these two issues separate in your mind. The question of when your clock starts, it begins ticking when you break your wudu. The question of how much time you have is determined by when you actually wiped on it for the first time. If you were a resident when you wiped on it for the first time, then that means you're going to have just 24 hours. Even if you start traveling before your 24 hours are up, you're going to only get 24 hours in total because you wiped while you were still resident. And if you were a traveler and while traveling you wiped on it while you were a traveler, that means you get a 72-hour period, except that if your travel ends, meaning if you become a resident before the 72-hour period has elapsed, then your period of wiping will now immediately switch to 24 hours, simply because you're not a traveler anymore. And the 72 hours, it only applies to travelers. So if you stop being a traveler, you will just automatically revert back to having a 24-hour period. Please review this lesson carefully. This issue of wiping over foot gear, this is something that comes up a lot. You're going to be asked about it a lot. You may even want to follow this yourself. And so practice, practice being able to recite all 5 of these conditions so that way you remember them. You can make sure you're meeting them all. Practice being able to say back the things in this paragraph so you remember, like, when is it 24 hours? When is it 72 hours? What time does the clock start? Rehearse these things in your memory. Go over it when you're driving or waiting on the bus or something to make sure you don't forget this stuff so that you can apply it correctly when you use it. Some of us, I've noticed, a lot of us Black folk, for one reason or another, and not just Black folk, like Muslims in general in America, a lot of us, for whatever reason, are shy to wash our feet in the sink if it's like a public bathroom. Or even if it's like a semi-public bathroom, like the one at work, where there aren't like tons of strangers going in it, but people, your coworkers might see you. A lot of people are shy to wash their feet at work. And some of us are so shy to wash our feet at work that they'll even skip salat rather than risk being seen washing their feet. And that is, of course, completely out of the question. Missing a salat is never an option. There's literally no situation on earth where you're permitted to miss a salat. So if you are one of these people who, if you are one of these people that's like scared to wash your feet in the sink at work or wash your feet in the sink at the airport or wherever you might be, if you're one of those people, then you might want to start wearing boots. That way you don't have to wash your foot in the sink. You can just take your wet hands and wipe on top of your boot. Okay? If you're one of those people, then it's even more important for you to learn this chapter very well, because you are going to be someone who's probably going to follow these rules frequently. Now, one thing that the author, may Allah have mercy on him, did not mention here is what things will invalidate your ability to wipe over your foot gear. It's not mentioned here in this chapter, but it should have been mentioned. Okay, there are three things where if it happens, you will no longer be entitled to wipe on your foot gear. So you might want to write these down. The first thing that if it happens, you don't have the right to wipe on your foot gear anymore. It would be if one of your foot gear thingies comes off. So if you took one of them off intentionally, or if it slipped off by mistake, or if you took both of them off, or they both slipped off by mistake, or if one of them fell apart, or if one of them got a hole in it, so now it's not covering everything that needs to be covered. You know, if one of these 5 conditions stopped being met, okay, if for whatever reason one of your foot gear items came off or stopped being valid, then that means you now no longer have the right to continue wiping on the foot gear. That's number one. Removing one of the foot gears ends your freedom to wipe on them. Number two, the end of your wiping duration. So if you're someone that has a 24-hour period to wipe, well, then as soon as your 24 hours are up, you no longer have the right to wipe on your foot gear. You're going to have to remove them and make a wudu by washing your feet. And then once you're in a state of complete purity, if you want, you can put your foot gear back on. And then you would get another 24-hour period beginning from the first time that you break wudu after that. The third thing that will make it so that you cannot continue wiping on your foot gear is if you did something that necessitates a ghusl. If you did something that necessitates ghusl, well, then you will not be able to just wipe on your foot gear after that, because the wiping on foot gear is something you do as a part of wudu. It's not something that you do as part of ghusl. So you're going to have to take them off in order to make your ghusl. So there's no wiping on them at that point. But after you enter your complete state of purity, you can put them back on. I'll say them again, the three things that make it so that you cannot continue wiping on your foot gear. Number one is removing one of them. Number two is if your allotted period of time ends. Number three is if you did something that necessitates a ghusl. If any of these three things happens, then you're no longer entitled to wipe on the khuf. And I remind you, when we say removing one of them, it doesn't matter if you did it on purpose or if it happened by mistake or if it just fell apart or got a hole in it or any one of the 5 conditions stopped being met. All of that counts as you no longer wearing a valid foot gear. So it's as if you took it off. All right, let's finish off this paragraph, inshallah. The next thing that the author is going to mention is how you actually do the wiping. How is it done? He says it is recommended to wipe the upper and lower parts, including the heel, in lines once. That is a tough thing to visualize. I wish I had something easy to show you on. But the recommended way to wipe on your khufs is to take your right hand while your right hand is wet, and you put it on top of the toes on top of your foot. you put it where your toenails are. You put your right hand, you put the fingers of your right hand where the toenails are, okay? And you put the fingers of the left hand back at your heel. So toes in the front, heel in the back, and then you wipe like this. You wipe your hands in opposite directions so that your left hand, which was at the heel of your foot at the bottom, will wipe the bottom of your hoof going towards the direction of your toes. And your right hand, which is on top of your toes, will wipe along the top of the hoof going in the direction of your ankle. So 2 lines, one hand on top, one hand on the bottom, and you wipe in opposite directions. That is the recommended way to wipe on your foot gear. And to do it just one time. Remember, in wudu, it's recommended to do everything 3 times, but not wiping on the foot gear. Wiping on the foot gear should be done 1 time, and it's disliked to do it more than once. Okay, this is because when you wipe on foot gear, your hand is wet. Okay, and water usually is harmful to clothing, like shoes and things like that. If you were to wipe it 3 times every time, that would only accelerate the rate at which your foot gear would become damaged and need to be replaced. So you don't want to destroy your wealth. You wipe on it only 1 time. That's what's recommended. What's recommended is what? To use 2 hands. Right hand at the top of the toes, left hand at the back of the heel, and you wipe in opposite directions. That's what's recommended, but that's not what is required. Okay, your obligation, the minimum of wiping on your foot, what does it say? It says the obligation is to wipe a minimal area from the outer upper part. So the minimum that you can wipe in order to say that you wiped on your foot gear is that you need to wipe some part of the top of the foot gear. It can be the top of the toes. It can be the top of the main part of the foot. It could be, the front of the foot gear over near where the ankle is. But the minimum is you have to wipe on the top of it somewhere. It doesn't have to be the entire length of the top. It could just be a little bit. You can just wipe a little boop. But it needs to be somewhere along the top of the foot gear. That's what's required in order for you to be able to say you wiped on your foot gear. But what's recommended is to wipe the entire length of the top as well as the entire length of the bottom at the same time by going in 2 directions. That's what's recommended. Wa sallallahu ala sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. Let me flip through these questions because I believe there were a few. Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi ta'ala to those who salamed me. Someone asked about swim socks. So I've seen on the internet advertisements for all kinds of fancy socks for the special trail runners and all these outdoorsy extreme games kind of people. I haven't tested them out to see if they're strong enough. If you think that these socks may be strong enough, I encourage you to test them out. Put on the sock, okay? And then wear it outside with no shoes, no sandals or anything under it. Just wear the sock directly on the ground. Walk around on it for 45 minutes in the normal ground. I don't mean just walking around someplace nice and soft. I mean, walk around in the dirt where the rocks are and there's sticks and things. Walk around for 45 minutes. Okay? Rest a little bit. Walk around for an hour. Rest a little bit, walk around for 45 minutes. If the socks can stand up to that, if you can wear them without being in pain, and the socks can stand up to that without being worn out, well, then that means they're strong enough for you to wear for a 24-hour period. Triple that much walking to see if they're strong enough for a 72-hour period. But I mean, I haven't tested these socks myself, so I can't give you a yes or no answer that they're durable enough. But I'm saying this is something you can test. At this point, you know what the rule is. You know what the condition is, so you can assess for yourself if the conditions are met. Someone asked, what do you say to someone who believes Al-Albani's book and they've been wiping over socks? What do you say to them? Say nothing to them. Okay, you don't have to say anything to such a person. Okay, there are madhabs that allow people to wipe on socks. Right? Such a madhab does exist. Okay, so if you see someone wiping on socks, just assume that they're following that madhab. And unless you know that they're doing something incorrectly in that madhab, then you have no basis to correct them. Okay, just ignore them. Let them do their thing, and you stick to what you know. If any of you get lazy, now that you know that there's a real madhab that will let you wipe on socks, if any of you decide you want to wipe on socks, then I'm telling you, your responsibility is not to wipe on the socks until you've learned how to do so. So you need to find out which madhab that is that allows the wiping of socks. You need to find the details in that madhab of how thick the sock needs to be. You need to find out the other rules of how to make wudu in general in that madhab and the rules of what breaks the wudu in that madhab so that you can follow that madhab on matters of wudu. Until you've learned, all that pertains to wudu in that particular madhab, please do not wipe on socks before you end up harming yourself. I saw a lot of people making guesses about, when you break wudu. Just take the easy opinion, okay? If you're peeing, when you're done peeing, that's when the wudu broke. All right, if you're sleeping, when you wake up is when the wudu broke. Okay, if you touch somebody skin to skin, then when your skin separated is when the wudu broke. Okay, that's the easiest opinion. So I say just go with that. Someone asked, I'm confused because every traveler starts as a resident. So before he leaves on his trip and he wipes, he's only allowed 24 hours instead of 72 to wipe? That's a very good question, mashallah. And this is something that I find a lot of us struggle to understand. So I'm going to say this as clearly as I can to get y'all to understand this issue. In Islam, a person receives judgments, like the Sharia judges or places a ruling on a person, designates you with a certain ruling. The designation that the Sharia puts on you will not change without evidence or some kind of event like making the change happen. So for example, if you make wudu, the fact that you made wudu, that is the evidence that causes a change. Before you made wudu, you were not in a state of purification. You could not make a valid salat. But once you made wudu, your state changed. Now you're in a state of purification. Now you can make a salat. So what is the event that caused a change from one state to the next state? It's the fact that you performed a valid wudu. Okay? So now you have a valid wudu. Alhamdulillah. 30 minutes later, salat time came in. Say Asr time comes in 30 minutes after you made that wudu. Well, guess what? Before Asr time came in, you were not in a state where you were obligated to pray Asr. But an event took place. An event took place, which means the shadow of a stick sticking up has now reached a length that it's reached a length that indicates that Asr time has begun. Because that event took place, now there's a change in ruling. Now, all of a sudden, this obligation for you to pray Asr comes down on you like a ton of bricks. Now this burden is placed upon you that was not there 10 seconds earlier. There has to always be some event that causes a change in the ruling. When it comes to traveling, there has to be an event that causes you to become a traveler. And prior to that event, you were not a traveler, you were a resident. And when it comes to traveling, the moment that you switch from being a resident to being a traveler is the moment that you left your town. Islamically, a town is just a cluster of buildings. So when we don't care where the city limit is or these imaginary lines that the government draws, those things don't matter at all. If you have a whole bunch of buildings close together, that's a town or a city. And if you keep driving through the city, through all those clusters of buildings, eventually you're going to reach a point where the buildings end. Where now, when you drive past that last building, now it's just, woods or fields or something, and not a cluster of buildings anymore. Once you pass out of that cluster of buildings, at that point, you became a traveler. Because now you're traveling. Up until that point, you were still in town. So you hadn't traveled anywhere. You're just going around town. Once you leave the town, you become a traveler. And, at that point, we can ask questions about, well, how far away is your destination? If your destination is more than a certain distance away, and some other conditions are met, well, then we would say this is a travel that will permit you to shorten your prayers. But if you haven't yet exited the town, if you haven't passed the last building in the cluster of buildings that make up the town, if you haven't passed that last building yet, then that means you're still a resident. I'm saying this like this to inshallah, so that people will understand. I meet so many people. They say, oh, I'm traveling today. Like say it's, 12 noon. Dhuhr time comes in. It's 12 noon. It's Dhuhr time now. They plan on driving up to New York at 2 o'clock. At 2 o'clock, they're going to go to New York. They've already made up their mind they're going to travel today. So at 12 o'clock, when they haven't even started traveling yet, they got in their mind, oh, I'm traveling. So let me just go ahead and pray Dhuhr and Asr right now. No, you can't do that. Why? Because you're not traveling. That particular dispensation that you can shorten some prayers and combine some prayers, that dispensation is something that is only available to people who are travelers, meaning that the Sharia has placed upon them a ruling that they are travelers. You can't be a traveler if you haven't left your town yet. If you're still in town, you haven't traveled yet. Even if you have all your bags in the car and you left your house and you started driving to New York already, if you're still in town, your travel hasn't begun yet. You still haven't traveled. Even though you left your house, if you haven't made it past the edge of the town, you're still not a traveler. I'm saying all of that because if a person is a resident, before he leaves on his trip, he hasn't left yet, why would he expect to have a 72-hour period? He's a resident. And so if he wipes on his footgear while he's a resident, then the rules of a resident are going to be finalized on him because he simply wasn't a traveler. But if he can hold off on wiping on that footgear, if he can wait hop in the car, leave the town, and once he's outside of the town, once he's out in the fields and the woods or whatever, once he's out there in the wilderness, if he waits until then, and that's when he wipes on his foot gear for the first time, well, then he would have a 72-hour period, because it would no longer be the case that he wiped on them as a resident. In this case, he waited until he was a traveler before he wiped on them. You need to know when you become a traveler and when you don't. I know that was a long answer, but inshallah, it was understood. I don't know any validations for valid socks. I have no recommendations for valid socks. Someone asked if I know anything to recommend. I don't. I don't. Excellent question. Someone said, what if you made your wudu and then you put your socks on, but then you broke wudu before you could put the shoes on, before you put the boots on, for example? What's the ruling here? In this case, if you put on socks and then say you broke wind, and then you put on the boots, in this case, you put those boots on when you were not in a state of complete purification. In this case, the first condition in that list of 5 conditions, the first condition is not met. Okay, so you're free, of course, to wear those boots if you want to, but next time that you need to make wudu, you will have to take the boots off and take the socks off and wash your feet. Okay, because you won't be able to just wipe on the foot gear because the first condition was not met. Man, y'all hitting me with the toughies today, huh? Okay. Wa alaikum assalam, brother. Somebody asked, if someone is Shafi'i and they're praying behind a Maliki, and the Maliki does not say the Basmala, how can this Shafi'i person continue? There are a couple of solutions in this case. My preferred solution, the one that I use, and it maybe isn't an option for many of you. See, I've learned how to make salat in the Maliki method. Okay, so I know that much of the Maliki method. So whenever I'm in a situation where the person leading the salat doesn't say the Basmala, I just pray behind him following Maliki rules, because I know that won't invalidate the salat by the Maliki school. So I just pray Maliki. That's how I do it. And if you know enough about Maliki fiqh to be able to do that, I think that's your best solution. However, if you don't know enough Maliki fiqh to do that, know that in the Shafi'i school, you are permitted to estimate the amount of time that it would take a person to say the Basmala. And this is because some people say the Basmala quietly. Even if they're going to say the rest of the Fatiha out loud, some people will say the Basmala quietly, like under their breath. So if the Imam left a gap, like say he started the salat, he said, Allahu Akbar, Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. If he left a gap long enough that that person maybe said a Basmala quietly in that gap, well then as a Shafi'i, you can assume that that's exactly what he did. You can assume that he said the Basmala quietly in that gap, and you can continue to pray behind him as if he said it. But then you would need to observe this gap in every rak'ah. So when he stands up to start the second rak'ah, you also observe the gap in between his takbir and when he said, Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. All right, but this is also a solution. According to the strong saying in the Shafi'i madhab, you can do that as well. Now, the third option, which is a little bit controversial, this is the opinion of Imam As-Suyuti rahimahullah. Imam As-Suyuti held an opinion that the follower, how do I say this? According to Imam As-Suyuti, the follower's salat becomes invalid if the imam's salat is invalid, which is true in the Shafi'i school in general. But according to Imam As-Suyuti, you would determine if the imam's salat is invalid based on the imam's madhab, not based on your madhab as a follower. So according to Imam As-Suyuti, if the imam's salat is valid in his madhab, then that means his salat is valid, and you as a Shafi'i can pray behind him. You, of course, pray according to your madhab, but you don't, according to this opinion, you basically would not consider the imam's salat invalid for leaving out the basmalah. This opinion is controversial. I'm not aware of anyone else in the Shafi'i school who said that, although I think maybe Imam al-Muzani said something like that as well. It's a little bit controversial, especially because Imam As-Suyuti's status as a mujtahid is not confirmed. So that's like the last resort. I would avoid that opinion, honestly. I would avoid that opinion, honestly, but you may need to resort to it depending on like the kind of pressures you're under in a particular case. So just to repeat, my preferred solution in that case is just pray behind the imam as a Maliki, but that requires knowing enough Maliki rules to do that. My secondary solution is if the imam leaves a gap, well, then you can pray behind him as a Shafi'i. The last resort is to judge the imam according to a different madhab than your own, which according to Imam As-Suyuti is something that is feasible. But that opinion, you might say, is strange. And as Muslims, we shouldn't be seeking out and following strange opinions. All right, we want to try to the best of our ability to stick to the strongest opinions because those are the ones with the most evidence. Okay, if you're not following the strong opinions, it's as if you're just following your own desires. And so we don't want to do that. That's something, that's a last resort that you would only resort to out of necessity. Okay, I don't see any other questions. So let's say La ilaha illallah. La ilaha illallah. La ilaha illallah. La ilaha illallah. Allahumma salli ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallim. Allahumma salli ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallim. Allahumma salli ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallim. Rabbi ighfir li wa lil mu'minina wal mu'minat. Rabbi ighfir li wa lil mu'minina wal mu'minat. Rabbi ighfir li wa lil mu'minina wal mu'minat. A couple other questions came in. Someone said, I thought we were supposed to honor the salat of other madhabs. It's not quite as simple as you're saying it, sister. So yes, all four of the madhabs honor the other madhabs. All four of them consider the other madhabs valid. But that doesn't mean that for the one who's following madhab A, that he can always follow someone in another madhab. It doesn't mean that. For example, if I go into a Hanafi masjid and the Hanafis there pray in a Hanafi way, all right, let's just say, for example, I saw the Hanafi imam shake hands with a woman skin to skin. So now, according to my madhab, I have to judge, because I'm a Shafi'i, I have to judge that that imam doesn't have wudu anymore. He just broke his wudu when he shook hands with that lady. Okay? My madhab says I have to make that ruling. I have to make that judgment. The imam's madhab says he never broke his wudu. The imam's madhab says he still has wudu. So the imam might walk in and lead a salat, and some Hanafis might pray behind him because in their madhab, the imam has wudu, and there's nothing wrong with this salat, and they pray behind him, and their whole jama'ah is happy. Okay? But me as a Shafi'i, I can't pray behind someone if I know that that person doesn't have wudu. I can't. But I honor their madhab in the sense that I don't tell them that their salat is invalid. I don't go to them and say, hey, y'all got to pray all over again because the imam broke his wudu. No. I say, well, in their madhab, he didn't break his wudu. So according to their madhab, that salat is fine. I honor it in that way, meaning like I consider it valid for them, but I recognize that it's not valid according to my madhab. And so according to my madhab, because that salat is not valid, I can't join that salat. I would have to pray afterwards. Okay, and they have rules like that too for us. Every madhab has rules like that. But when it comes to the salat, because the Shafi'i rules are in some respects the most strict, the tradition, especially in places like Mecca and Medina, where you normally have people of all the madhabs present, the tradition is usually to have a Shafi'i lead the salat, because the Shafi'i rules will produce a salat that's acceptable in all of the madhabs. But it's not true the other way around. You know, madhabs that leave out a basmala, that salat isn't valid according to Shafi'i. So if someone leaves a salat like that, Shafi'is can't pray behind them. Unless there's some kind of loophole like what I just mentioned. Like there was a time gap long enough that he might have said a basmala. Things like that. There might be little loopholes that'll let the Shafi'i pray behind them. But in general, it will be a fitna if the one who leads the salat doesn't say the basmala. In general, that will cause a fitna in a situation where different madhabs are present. So the imam should go ahead and say a basmala. Someone asked, shouldn't the imam know the pillars according to the Shafi'i school, even if he is not a Shafi'i? I mean, it'd be nice if all the imams knew the Shafi'i rules, but I would never assume that just because someone's leading a salat that he knows the Shafi'i rules, especially if he was educated in a different method. Like I would not expect a Hanafi to know Shafi'i rules, just like I wouldn't expect a Maliki or a Hanbali to know Shafi'i rules. I expect them to know their rules. But yes, like I said, the tradition in Mecca and in Medina is to have the Shafi'i person lead the salat. That way, no one objects. Someone asked, you know, can we wear any kind of shoe as long as it covers the foot and the ankle? It doesn't have to necessarily be boots. Again, I'm going to say, think less about the name shoe and the name boot or whatever kind of names these fancy designers put on their designs. Think instead about the 5 conditions. If the 5 conditions are met, then you can wear it and wipe on it. If the 5 conditions are met, you can wear it and wipe on it. So whatever kind of shoes you have, ask yourself, were you in a state of purity before you put them on? Do they cover the entire foot as well as the ankle? Does it stop water from seeping through? Is it made of a pure substance? And is it strong enough and proper fitting enough that you could walk on it outside for the amount of time you need to walk on it? If it meets those conditions, then it counts. Whether you call it a boot or someone else calls it a boot or someone calls it whatever, the conditions are what matter, not whatever name the footgear was given. Someone asked, is that why you may see some people praying together in another area of the masjid instead of with the main group? I hope that never happens. Okay, that would be another fitna. Okay, as Muslims, we're supposed to be one jama'ah. Like we're together, we're united. We shouldn't be divided. And the salat is one of the areas where our unity is most visible, because you'll have people of different races, different ages, different madhabs, all lining up side by side with no distinctions among them, all facing the same direction, all praying the same direction, etc. It's one of the biggest signs of our unity. So there should never be a second jama'ah happening while there's a first jama'ah happening. Like that second group should join the first group, and they should make the one jama'ah bigger. And if for whatever reason they don't want to join that one jama'ah, because, for example, they believe that prayer is invalid, or whatever reason they may have for not wanting to join that jama'ah, well then, in that case, what they should do is wait for the first jama'ah to be finished before they start their jama'ah. I would be enraged if there were two jama'ahs happening at the same time in a masjid, especially if one of those jama'ahs is like the main jama'ah, like the first one, the one they call the adhan for. Then if someone did a separate jama'ah on the side, then that's fitna for sure. But in some cases, you do see people praying apart from the main jama'ah for reasons that are beyond their control. And one of those is Qibla. Many of you know that in North America, there are like debates about what direction we're even supposed to face. Some people face northeast, some people face southeast. And some people will refuse to pray the other direction. Like some northeasters will refuse to pray southeast. Some southeasters will refuse to pray northeast. And they have their reasons for that. And so if you find someone that believes the Kaaba is in a completely different direction, and that's why they don't pray with the group, well, then just be understanding of it. You know, just like we consider the madhabs valid, you know, this is an issue where not everyone agrees in their ijtihad about which direction we need to face. So, you know, let them have their ijtihad on this issue, and you have yours. And don't let it be a cause for like division. Let it be something you respect, just like we respect differences of opinion between Shafis and Malikis. We respect differences of opinion between people who pray northeast and people who pray southeast. You know, somebody mentioned here how in the Hanafi school, the salat times are a little bit different. So in the Hanafi school, it's well known that Asr comes in quite a bit later than the time that the other three madhabs consider Asr to come in. Their Isha time also is a little bit later, but not as big of a gap difference as the Asr one. And this can lead to issues. Sometimes there'll be a masjid, and Asr time comes in according to the three madhabs. And so they pray the Jama'ah Salat, but the Hanafi, according to the Hanafis, Asr time hasn't even come in yet, so they can't join that Jama'ah. So what do? They wait until Asr time is in, according to the Hanafi school, and they pray their own Jama'ah afterwards. Again, this is a case where this isn't fitna. This is a case of respecting the differences among the scholars. But if you're in that, if that's the issue for you, I strongly recommend you ask your Hanafi teachers about some other sayings in the madhab. You know, I'm not a Hanafi and I haven't studied Hanafi, so I don't want to, you know, speak too much on this issue. But I'm pretty sure one or maybe even both of Abu Hanifa's two famous companions agreed with the three madhabs on the time when Asr comes in. So if you want to be a Hanafi, I'm pretty sure you have an option to pray Asr when the other madhabs pray Asr. But, you know, I encourage you to get the detailed answer from your own Hanafi sheikhs, insha'Allah ta'ala. All right. Well, if there are no other questions, then I will see you next week, insha'Allah ta'ala, at the normal time. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh.